Okay, well, thank you all for joining today. We do have a small group, so please feel free to interrupt at any time and ask questions while you're thinking about it and while I'm thinking about whatever I just said. So please don't hesitate to either raise your digital hand or you can just shout out a question or you can put it in the chat, either way. I am Dr. Barbara Fortini. I am the program director for our Masters of Science in Human Genetics and Genomic Data Analytics. And on the call, we also have Kamika, who's one of our wonderful members of our admissions team. So she can also help answer questions and reach out to her or me after the fact if you want to know any more information. So let me just share my screen and we can get started. Does this look good for everybody?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So our program is one of several different master's programs at KGI and one of two master's programs that focus on human genetics. The other is our Masters of Science in Human Genetics and Genetic Counseling. So if you're interested in that program, I definitely encourage you to go to one of our events that talks about the genetic counseling program, but we're the sister program, so we have some overlaps and some unique courses that we offer. Okay. Oops, my slide is not advancing here. Here we go. So the MSGDA program is for people who are interested in lots of things. So it's a great program in that we don't have one specific career that all of our graduates get. There's lots of different options that are out there. And so if you're interested in personalized or precision medicine, this might be the program for you. If you're interested in using genetics and genomics to design the next great blockbuster pharmaceutical drug, this program could also be for you. Or if you're interested in genetic tests that are used for clinical diagnosis, we talk about that a lot, or something maybe that's direct to consumer, so something like a 23andMe kit. Those are both types of developments that are big industries in California. And the last one is if you want to use big data to advance health, and that really leans on our data analytics side, not just our genetics and genomics side. So when we started the MSGDA program, we really thought about what is the future of genetics and genomic medicine. So our program's pretty new. We welcomed our 4th cohort this year. So we've been having students for 4 years. We have 2 graduate classes, but the whole program was really conceived within the last 5 years to think about how has the genetics industry changed and where is it going in the future. And so to do that, we thought about what are the skills that someone is going to need to be a leader in genetics or genomics. And so we developed it from the ground up to really have a strong foundation in science and human genetics, but then add in bioinformatics, so the ability to use computers to analyze data, and the industry skills that KGI is really known for to prepare students to work at either clinical genomics labs, research centers, in biotech, for pharmaceutical companies, all kinds of places, as we start to usher in this age of precision and personalized medicine. So to do that, we have a couple of different components that we think really define what it means to have an MSGDA degree. The first is that foundational coursework. So we take lots of genetics classes, and those genetics classes are often with our genetic counseling students. So you get a really strong background in the science. Then we add in the cutting edge courses in applied life science from the Riggs School at KGI. So things like the bioscience industry, biostats, there's a transcriptomics course, things that prepare you to work from the day you graduate. And then we added on our innovative human genomics curriculum that's really thinking about what are the exact skills that you need to become a leader in human genomics. And so those were the specialty courses you'll see me talk about on the next slide. Now, we can design all these elements into a program, but I think what really makes MSGDA special is not what you learn, but who you learn with. And that's a real exciting part about being in KGI in the School of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, So you get to take classes with the future genetic counselors that are going to be working in California. They're going to be working at the same hospitals and the same companies, so you already know them. You also get to know some of the students who are in our applied life science program. So maybe someone getting a master's in translational medicine or someone getting a master's in business and science. And so they're also going to be working at the same companies, maybe at a marketing role, maybe at a regulatory science role, but you'll already have your network building because they will be your classmates at KGI. And so that, coupled with our hands-on experience, our experiential education, are really what are going to give you the skills to be successful. And it's really what makes our program pretty unique. So our program structure is 21 months. That basically just means 2 academic years with a summer in between. The first year is a lot of classes. So you are going to be in the classroom a lot. There's a lot of units, master's level expectations, but different than maybe what you experienced in undergrad, every single class is going to be something that's directly related to what you're going to do. So there are no classes that are off in left field or just a boring requirement. Everything was tailored to be part of the program. And so examples of these are our core genetics courses. They're the ones in the red hexagon. Some of the ones that I teach are up there. So I teach human molecular genetics in the fall. That's the first big science class that you'll take. We also have a genetic disease mechanisms course. And then in the spring, we have human genomics, which is another one that I teach. We talk about really what's going on at the cutting edge of genomics versus genetics. And that's a great question for later if you want to talk about what the difference is. And then in the spring, we also have our clinical series, and that's our medical genetics course, our clinical cancer genomics course, and biochemical genetics. And those are taken with the genetic counseling students. And that gives you that real foundation and not just the concepts of genetics, but what does it mean to be a gene that's sequenced in patients that have some sort of disease. It's very different than maybe a class where you talked about fruit fly genetics or yeast genetics. This is really human clinical grade genetics. At the same time, we have our applied life science courses. These are the ones that are shared with the MBS students and then maybe the Masters of Science students or translational medicine. So one of the key hallmark courses there is the Intro to the Bioscience Industry. Sure, as students, you know a little bit about how academia works. You might have been in a research lab, but do you know how the biotech industry works? Like, what's the difference between doing research in a lab for a professor versus research in a lab for a company that's going to sell a product? We also have clinical biostats. You'll take that course with students from other programs, and that's one of the big courses at KGI. So there's several hundred students. But it's one of the courses where you get to make a lot of friends across all the programs because pretty much everybody takes that course. We do have a class in transcriptomics, so that's one of our programming-based courses, and that's taught in the programming language R. Then we have a clinical trial design course, which really helps us start to read clinical literature, not just basic science papers, but clinical trial papers. We also have one called Papers in Applied Medicine. So again, applied medicine means you take discoveries from the lab and then you apply them into people. We do have an ethics course because it's very important that we do all of this ethically. And then our pharmacogenomics and precision medicine course. We do have a few of our specialized genomic data analytics courses in the first year. Those are the courses in the purple hexagon. Purple is my favorite color, so I put those classes in purple. And the first is our programming for the biosciences. That is the intro course for programming. It's taught in Python, but it's taught for people who have no background in computer science before. So if you have never done any sort of computer science programming, don't be scared. We do start you off at the very beginning with a programming course. We also have a special genomics lab that we teach during the spring. And so while everybody in the genetics programs, both us and genetic counseling, take human genomics, the GDA students will take a special lab course. So we do some hands-on sequencing and data manipulation to go with the concepts that we're learning in the classroom. So that pretty much gets everyone through their first year. And so that's a lot of units, a lot of classes, but it really gives you the background to do something really special in your internship. So between years 1 and 2, everybody does a summer internship. That's 400 hours, 4 times, full time, so that's 10 weeks. And you can do that at either a genetics company or an academic research place that does a lot of human genomics. We'll talk about that in a bit. And so when you come back in the second year, that's when we really have those specialty courses that makes our program unique. The first is our DNA sequencing and variant analysis course, and it teaches you to interpret variations that are found in people that have certain phenotypes and decide if that change in the genome is pathogenic. And that is a really important course for people who want to go on to have a job as a variant interpretation scientist, which is about what half of our alumni do right now. And so it's a really important course in our program. The next one following that is our Genomic Data Visualization and Management course. That's another one of our technical courses, and it's taught in Python. Then we have Genomic Knowledge Translation, which is just a fancy way to say communications. We have a whole final semester course where we talk about all this really complicated, very technical information that's going to make you unique, but you have to be able to talk about it to people who aren't genomic scientists. So we have a class where we practice doing like a blog post for a organization that has rare disease information, or you have to do an elevator pitch for getting a job, or you have to explain your capstone research. So we do all of that in Genomic Knowledge Translation. And the last course on the list is the fun course. It's a course that I also teach. It's called Functional Genomics, and we joke it's putting the fun in genomics, because this is the course where we talk about all the really cutting edge research stuff that maybe is still 10 to 15 years away from the clinic, but it's how we're learning all the really interesting things about the genome that lets us design better drugs and think about personalized medicine. What kind of research is coming to really understand those techniques? So those are all of the courses that everyone takes. And then we have our concentrations. So in your second year, you do get to pick an emphasis pathway and select 6 units that would help you prepare for a career with all of these skills that you can really focus on your interests. And I'll have another slide with some of those electives. Okay, before I move on to the next slide, does anyone have any questions about the classes or the order the classes occur in, or what kind of other students will be in those classes at the same time? Okay, I don't hear you. Again, if you think of one, feel free to jot it down or put it into the chat. Okay. So this slide, I won't go through it, but again, it's all of our courses that I just talked about. But you'll see in the genetics program, so these are classes that are taught by our genetics faculty. That's 32 credit hours or units total. And we have also the shared courses with our RIGS programs on the applied life sciences side, and that's 16.5 credit hours or units. And then we add on to that the capstone research, which is 12 units, 6 units in your second year fall and 6 units in your second year spring, and then your concentration. So it's going to add up to 66.5 units, which is a lot, but hopefully these are all courses that you would be interested in. Okay, so I mentioned our concentrations. So we do have 3 concentrations that allow you to specialize a bit of your education. The first is our clinical decision support concentration. That's for people who really want to work with patient data. You're not necessarily going to meet the patient, you're not going to sit down with them, but you really want to help individual patients understand how their genetic information might help them. And so if you're in the clinical decision support concentration, some really popular electives might be the human embryology and prenatal diagnosis course. That's a genetic counseling course, but it's open to our GDA students. We have a new course coming this spring called Microbiomics and Pathogen Genomics. There's been a little bit of developments in pathogen genomics in the last few years. And so this is a very exciting new course. We have another one called Molecular Basis of Disease. Again, that's really understanding why certain proteins and mutations might lead to a phenotype. Advanced in vitro diagnostics helps explain how people actually get diagnosed with changes, and medical terminology. You might be reading a lot of patient files, so it's important to know all of those words that doctors tend to use that can be very specialized. And then clinical decision support is our most popular of the concentration. While we were designing the program, though, we were talking to some of our industry partners about it. We were having conversation at a pharmaceutical company, and they were like, oh, we need to hire these people. We need people with genetics knowledge to help run our clinical trials. And so we asked them more about this, and this led to the creation of our second concentration, which is clinical trial design. Because these days when we study drugs, we want to make sure that we don't accidentally discover a genetic relationship, that we have the right people of all kinds of genetic backgrounds in both the control and the test subjects. It also involves a lot of drug discovery, involves a lot of genetics. So we use that information we've learned through sequencing patients and sequencing healthy people to try to design better clinical trials. And so people who are interested in going into this pharmaceutical development role might take our genetic engineering course, our series Pharmaceutical Discovery and Development, which is a very popular series at KGI. We have a class called Biotechnology-Based Therapeutics and one Technologies for Biomarker and Drug Discovery. So these are existing courses that KGI has offered for a long time because we've been involved in this style of this part of the industry for so long, but this gives all of our genetic students a chance to learn those skills too. And our last concentration is for our entrepreneurs out there who want to make the next great testing kit or the next great assay that might diagnose patients. And that is called assay development. So assay just means a test basically, but you can test lots of things at the same time. And so if you're interested in designing those tests, again, you can take the genetic engineering course. You could take a course in medical diagnostics, so understanding what makes a test in general, how do you get it through the FDA, et cetera. Again, we have advanced in vitro diagnostics because if you want to have a competitor, you have to understand the existing products. We also have machine learning. So a lot of labs are now using automated intelligence and computer algorithms to understand more about how to analyze data, not doing so much by hand. That's very important for assay development. And then device and diagnostic product management. Now, we do have more courses that could meet these different concentrations on the KGI website. And as KGI launches new courses, we have a process where you can petition to include it in the concentration. I just wanted to highlight some of the really popular electives for you today, but if you have more questions about how you could put together your concentration, I'm happy to answer that. Okay, so that was a lot of courses, and we do have a lot of courses that are part of our program, but we also have a very important component that is experiential education. And that's getting hands-on experience and learning what the industry is actually about by being in it. And we have two opportunities for that. The first is the summer internship. So everybody has to do a summer internship. It could be at a genomics lab or it could be at a company. And then in the following year, our second opportunity is the Capstone Project. Excuse me, and that's a year-long research project where you work with data, you come up with a hypothesis and a theory, and you test your data, and then you write a final capstone report. Now that can be the same project you started in your internship. And so if you have a really great time in your internship, you're making progress, and the company or the research lab wants to keep you, you can do your whole thing in one place. And we really like that because that means the day you graduate, you have not just a new master's degree, but you also have a year of experience doing whatever that job is at that company. But if you end up wanting to do something different, maybe the site only lets people work on site, you can't do a remote capstone, because of course you do have classes, you can change. So we've had students do both a continuation and students who change their project between their internship and their capstone. On the screen, you'll see the logos from the different companies where students have worked in the past 3 summers. So we have had several students now at Fabric Genomics. That's a company that does a lot of data, clinical sequencing and data interpretation. We have had for several years students at St. Jude's Children's Hospital looking at the sequencing data from kids who have cancer. We had a student at LabCorp that was helping to learn how long read sequencing can be used. UCSF has had 2 students that have worked in more academic labs that work with patient data. Kylos has had several of our students. Genomenon is a really cool company that makes an AI search algorithm that reads literature. So it tells you not just, it's not just a keyword search, it's actually interpreting the paper, trying to decide if you want to read it. We did have a student this year for the first time at the J. Craig Ventnor Institute. We've had someone at Epicor Healthcare. That was a really interesting project where she worked on electronic healthcare records, trying to match up genetic data. We've had a student at BioMarin. We've had a student now at City of Hope who actually was working in their division of mathematical oncology, which is kind of a cool concept in and of itself. We've had lots of people at Scripps Research Institute. They have great summer internship program. They've had students there, I think, every year. We've had people at Merck doing a GWAS style, so an association project. We've had someone at Immucor and then one student at the NIH who I'll feature a bit later. I had a question in the chat from Genentech. So there are some great opportunities at Genentech. We have not yet had a student from the MSGDA program do their internship at Genentech, but definitely it's one of the options. And I know that KGI has had students from other programs do their internship at Genentech. But yeah, they would be a great option. Okay, so to give you a flavor of the kind of projects that our students have done, I have a slide here that has the title of the Capstone Projects that our students did not last year, but the year before last. And so this just shows really the variation between the projects. It really can be something you tailor to your interest. So we had one person who was looking at natural language processing algorithms. That's an AI way that the computer reads. And so it was a way to read PDFs to bring out what we call HPO terms. So the phenotype terms that we use to put into our software for analyzing variants. We had one person doing the CEBPA mutation phasing using PacBio sequencing, that's long read sequencing. We had one that was more of a really computational project where it was imputing genotypes and comparing 2 algorithms. So imputing genotypes means we were guessing people's genotypes based on other data. One that was looking at ethnicity identification from underrepresented populations to help us pick out variants that might not be interesting because they're just really common in certain ethnic groups, but not in the ethnic groups that are part of our databases. One on the exome sequencing, looking at when people should get reanalyzed. So let's say you have whole genome sequencing and they don't find anything. Well, we learn something new every day. So how often should they recheck to see if they know something now? So that was a project that looked at that in depth. So there were lots of different options for projects. And if you're interested, I'm happy to talk more about what students have done. But there's so many options out there. If you want to work in a small group, a big company, a startup company, an established pharmaceutical company, there's all kinds of options that our students have really enjoyed. Okay, so what do you want to do with one of these degrees? So I like to think that people can do anything with an MSGDA degree. It gives you lots of skills and you have the skills that nobody else has. So you can apply for jobs all over the place. But I thought I'd highlight 4 different careers that are really at the top of my mind when I think about putting the curriculum together. And the first is to be a clinical variant scientist or a variant curator. Sometimes it's also called a clinical genomic scientist. So if you're looking at just like a job board to think about what are the career options, you could search any permutation of those terms. And so there's 2 different places where people with this job title tend to work. The first is at a testing company. So a couple slides ago, I showed you that we had students at Fabric Genomics. Fabric Genomics is a company in the Bay Area. They sequence DNA and they interpret the variants. And so doctors' offices send them samples. They run the sample, interpret the sample, send back reports. So that there are lots of companies that do this. Some other examples are like Ambry or Invitae or Natera. You may not have heard of these companies, but you've definitely heard of clinical genetic testing. And so these are the companies that are actually doing the sample preparation, doing the sequencing, and looking at the results. The other option is at a big healthcare system or big hospital. So especially the children's hospitals, they do a lot of sequencing in-house. So they have enough patients that they don't contract out these tests. They do them on site at their lab. So they would have sequencers and they'd have all of the interpretation software there. And so that is a good choice if you like working in a small group of people. Maybe you do want to know the genetic counselor. Maybe you get to know the medical geneticist as a research group, and you might meet every week to talk about interesting cases. And so that would be an in-house team. Now, working for the big companies, you might be able to specialize more. So we have an alumnus from our first cohort. She works at Natera and she interprets their women's health panel. So she was really passionate about women's health genetics. And so she's able to specialize. So she gets samples from all over the country, but all of them are the same type of patient and the same genes that are being sequenced. One thing about doing variant curation is you almost always can work remotely. And this was before COVID. You know, that was a big selling point before we all worked from home. I used to say, like, this is the career if you want to work in your pajamas. But it's true, and it's never going back, right? We're never going to make people come to the office to do this sort of file interpretation. That said, almost all of the companies do have groups that work together. So you might have to still go on Zoom meetings. You might have colleagues you work with very closely, but it's likely to be a remote position. And so their job would be to take patient sequencing data, so the variants, the differences found in this patient, and then you'd have matched information on the symptoms that the patient has, and you would have to decide, does this variant explain what's going on in the patient? So you would look up in databases, you'd understand what the gene does, understand what the variant changes to decide, is this pathogenic or is it benign? And then you'd write up a report that would summarize your scientific judgment for this patient. And so these are huge opportunities, right? Because we're doing so much more sequencing these days. Sequencing is cheap, but the data analysis is still very expensive, right? Because you have to have all of this training to do the job properly. And so there, last time I checked, which was I think 2 weeks ago, there were over 1,000 open jobs just with that job title to do this kind of work. Okay. So the next career I wanted to highlight is being a genomic data analyst. So this is a little bit different, just on the types of data that you might deal with. So the same skills, but instead of working on individual patients, you might work on a whole disease state. You might work in a research lab that's, like, say, focused on diabetes. So you'd be looking at large data sets of lots of people that have diabetes and trying to find what genetic data makes that group interesting. And so the place where you're most likely to be a data analyst is either at a large research group or a hospital, or at a company that's trying to make use that information, that knowledge you gain to make a better drug or make a better test, or even just make a better diagnostic. So you could figure out who those patients are that might respond differently to a treatment. And so there's lots of companies that are using genetics every day to try to make better products. And so you can work for one of these companies. The other place you can work for is just one of the sequencing companies. So there are lots of companies that all they offer is DNA sequencing. They have a big warehouse with tons of DNA sequencers, but they always offer analysis service for just a couple $100 more. You know, there's always that little add-on, you know, do you want to sequence, or do you want us to also write you pretty reports? And so those companies have a lot of analysts that work for them. So you would work, maybe one day you'd be working on a heart disease project from an academic lab. And the next day you might be working on a city that's trying to find COVID in the sewer water. Then you might be on a different project. So I've talked to some people who work at these companies. They like it because every day you could have a new project that's totally different than the one you did before. And so you just use your same interpretation skills to answer a new question each time. And so no matter where you work, these data analysts are working with large data sets of genetic and genomic information to try to discover, something new that helps us move research and healthcare forward. All right. So the next career I wanted to talk about was maybe one that's the easiest to picture if you've done undergraduate research in a research lab, and that's just to be a research scientist. So everyone who's doing biology research these days has some connection to genetics and genomics. And a lot of people who are my age or older, we were not trained on any of this when we were in school. So we need to hire an expert. So we need to hire someone who can take all of this data we know how to generate and interpret it and give us some nice, pretty graphs that help us understand the condition. And so you would probably work in a very small group and become extremely specialized in something that you care about. So whether it's heart disease or cancer or diabetes, there's lots of research groups that are trying to understand what's going on in those cells and those patients, and they need experts that can help work through the data that they're generating and understand the trends that are involved. So it could be something very specific. You might be working on single cell sequencing data of people with leukemia, or you could do something huge where you have access to 1 million patients that have diabetes, and you can add in the step counts from their iWatch, and you can add in data from their fitness tracker. So there's all kinds of scales that we do this sort of research at, and the programming skills to analyze the data are the same, whether you're looking at 10 cells or 10,000 people. Okay, and the last career I wanted to highlight is the one we don't know about. I should just put a giant question mark on the screen. And this is for the emerging careers, the things that I haven't even thought about, right? Genetics is moving so fast these days. There are new products on the market all the time, and things that were concepts 3 years ago are ready to be marketed to people today. And so there are lots of jobs that I can think of that would require the skills that we just don't even know, we don't hear about them yet until they're already popular. So working for the genetic ancestry companies to launch new products, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, they have so much data. They're always trying to find a new way to provide value to the people who have done their testing kits. We have a lot more interest in health and wellness consulting. So not just, for many years, we've mostly sequenced people that were sick. Well, what about if we sequence the people that are healthy to understand how they're different, how to stay healthy? How can you use your genome to inform your decision-making before you get sick? Also, just reinterpreting the data that's out there. So lots of people, how many have done a 23andMe or an Ancestry? You can raise your little hand or digital hand, do the thumbs up. Oh, nobody on this call? Wow. Somebody's heard my lecture on genomic privacy, so that's good. But so if you've done one of these kits, a lot of people do them and they expect more information at the end. You just get a small little sheet that tells you some basic things. But of course, there's more data there. So if you wanted to pay someone to help really do a deep dive and interpret your data more personally, there are companies that now offer that as a service. And then of course, the next thing is startup companies. Lots of startup companies every day are trying to figure out how to use this genetic information to help people. And they're starting to do more genetic engineering. So that are potential gene therapies. So if we know the problem with a person, what happens if we can actually fix it and turn it back to what the sequence should have been? So none of this, there's only a few approved gene therapies right now, but we do have our first approved gene therapies out there. So they are helping people. And so now that has really kind of started a new race to figure out what are the diseases that this will work really well for, who are the patients it will work really well for, and can we do it safely? And so with a specialization in genomics, you really have all of the skills to do these exciting things, work at a company. If they need someone who can do bioinformatics, they need someone who can do sequencing, you would have all of those hands-on skills. So let's talk a little bit about our former students and their success. I am always so impressed with all of our students. But the first I wanted to highlight was Viviana Morillo, who got a special internship at the NIH. So between her first and second year in the Graduate Data Science Summer Program. So she went to Bethesda and got to work with scientists at the NIH. And it was a very small competitive program, only 15 in the country, and she was the only student from California. So it was a great opportunity for her. Since then, we have graduates and they have jobs. And so I wanted to highlight two of them. One who's working as a clinical variant analyst 2. So that's just a very fancy way to say the variant interpretation scientist. And she's working at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. So she gets to work with sequencing data for children who are sick and trying to figure out what's going on so they can treat the children better. And I don't know if you've heard much in the news, sequencing sick babies has been extremely successful at figuring out what's going on. When our old style of doing one test, oh, it came back inconclusive. Okay, let's do a different test. Oh, that's not it. Do a different test. That takes a long time. And when you have a really sick kid, what if you could just jump to the answer with one test? So whole genome sequencing helps us jump to that answer. And so there are lots of jobs at children's hospitals, because that's one of the places where sequencing is becoming step 1 and not, step 10 for diagnosing people. And then I also already talked a little bit about our student who works for Natera. So she's also a variant curator, and she's in the women's health division. So she works at a company. She gets samples mailed to the company, and she helps interpret them and figure out what's going on in those patients. All right, any questions so far about what our alumni do, what you can do, jobs, how many jobs there are? There's so many jobs in this field. It's really quite astounding how quickly the industry is expanding. No questions. Okay, so let me go on a bit to the application process. So hopefully all of you are convinced that you have to do the MSGDA program. And so who should apply? We love biology majors who want to know more about clinical genomics, but we also really like our students who come from different backgrounds. So maybe you're a computer science major that wants to switch to healthcare, or maybe a biostats major who wants to work on personalized medicine. Basically anyone who wants to use genetics and either the knowledge or the skills of how to manipulate genomic data to help people live healthy lives. So what does that mean in practice? So that means that we do require courses in chemistry, biology, and genetics. We do also offer genetics here as an undergraduate course if you haven't taken genetics yet. The application is pretty straightforward. We just want transcripts that show you've got a C or better in the prerequisites, a current CV or resume, your personal statement, 3 letters of recommendation, and the fee. We do accept international students, so if that applies to you, we will look for one of the proficiency tests. But in general, we're just looking for this well-rounded preparation that does include genetics. Now, if you have more computer science courses, that's great. If you have biochemistry, that's also really good. And any upper division genetics courses like bioinformatics or a genomics course, that's would be a real standout application for us. So to apply, we have our application at kgi.edu. So hopefully everybody has been to visit that website. We do accept applications on a rolling basis, which means that every few weeks we look at all the applications that have come in and make decisions on who to move to the next step. So it's really to your advantage to apply early. And so we'll consider you as soon as possible. We'll continue interviewing people until the class has reached capacity. And I believe the application is already open for next year. Yeah, is that true? Yes, September 1 it opened. Awesome. So the next step after submitting your application would be to find out if you're invited for an interview. So that will be a notification you'll get, and then we'll have both on-campus and virtual interviews. And then the admissions committee will accept waitlist or deny. So we do have a waitlist because we have those rolling admissions. So we will make the final decision in the summer. And we are, in fact, able to have international students. It is kind of a process. So the earlier, for any international students, the earlier you can apply, the better. And then if you're accepted, we can start helping with the paperwork to get the visa and everything into place. All right, any questions about the application process?
What is something that would stand out on a application?
Yeah, so I do like to see a continued interest in genetics and genomics, right? So that you've taken genetics at least and finished it and you're still super excited. I personally don't know why you wouldn't be excited about genetics, but we do sometimes get applicants who haven't taken genetics yet. And that's one of you can be in the process of finishing your prereqs when you apply, but we do want to make sure you know what genetics is and that you like it, because it's a lot of genetics if you don't like genetics. But we do also have students who come with experience working in the genetics industry. So maybe they've been a technician that helped like load the machines. We've had people who are actually licensed clinical scientists. So those are the people who handle patient samples at these companies, and they want to learn more about the data interpretation. We've also had people from very different backgrounds. So we have one person who was a high school science teacher for many years who wanted to get back into industry. And so I look for a wide variety of things. But I think any commitment to science and really showing that you've taken lots of classes, genetics, biology, biochemistry, any computer science experience would be fantastic. And then any sort of connection to the industry. So for those of you who are still undergraduates, you could do maybe an internship at one of these companies that has undergraduate internships. That would be great. I know Illumina has a really great program called iAspire. So I used to teach undergraduate genetics. I had some students do that. Or just if you have a connection, if you can do some shadowing, or even just really showing an interest by like listening to some podcasts, or to have done some reading on some of the genetics literature that's out there. There's a lot of great books that explore, the ethics of genetics and the history of genetics. And those are kind of interesting perspectives too. Great question.
Fortini, we have a quick question. They'd like to know, is there a set class size for MSGDA?
So we don't have a set number. We have a target number. So our current second year class is 12 and our current first year class has 13. So these are small groups. I get to know you very well. You will know your professors very well. So we're thinking our next class is going to be in that 15 size. We can, of course, we have a little bit of more freedom than some other programs. So if we have an exceptional applicant, we can always make room for one more. But we do want to keep it a group of cohort that can really work well and get great internships and get to know their faculty. So yeah, apply early. Any other questions?
And the alumni that's currently working at Terra, did she do an internship there first?
She did not. She did her internship with the Rare Genomics Institute, RGI. So they they do pro bono reanalysis for people who still don't have an answer after doing genetic testing. They're a great organization. But we have 2 alumni actually working at Natera, and one of them was able to turn her capstone into a full-time job. So they were very impressed with her work over her second year and hired her right after graduation. So that's always when we get so excited, because it really helps you showcase your skills. You have a whole year to audition and then hopefully get a job. And even if you don't get a job at that same company, you've definitely increased your professional network. So you have someone that can write you a really strong letter of reference. Okay, so my last slide is just about an opportunity that some of you might be interested in, and that is our Clinical Genetics and Bioinformatics Summer Program. This is a 1-week program, so we're going to offer it twice next summer, once in June and once in July. And it is a great week-long deep dive into everything we learn in the MSGDA program. So we have a tag team with the program director for our genetic counseling program. And we go through an entire family's diagnostic odyssey from before they're trying to have a kid, when they had a baby, the testing, and then what happens for the follow-up and treatment. And so through that, we'll think about all the steps of just the genetics of this and also the data analysis. So we're going to do a sequencing panel, and then we're going to do whole genome sequencing, and then we're going to interpret variants. Then we're going to go through what kind of deliverables get shared with the family. And then on the last day, we even have a mock session. So one of the genetic counseling students usually comes and plays the role of a genetic counselor. We have someone else that plays the role of the family. And so it's a great program to really see every aspect of clinical genetics and human genetics. And so it builds your resume, you get to network. We have a lot of guests that come in and talk about their jobs, and you'll help kind of clarify amongst all of these things I talked. There's so many different ways you can work in the clinical genomics industry. So maybe you want to be at one of these startup companies, maybe you want to be at a big testing company, maybe you want to work at a hospital. We try to expose you to all of those different options that you might have. Okay, so that's the end of my slides. Let's start with the questions now. I'll just click to the last one, which has my email. Who wants to ask a question? I'm used to teaching, so I can stand up here with my teacher voice waiting for a question.
I'm currently on the fence of pursuing a PhD after getting a master's. Would this program be beneficial to like get the master's here and then pursue a PhD elsewhere, or is it strictly for like master's and then going into like clinical research?
So that's a great question. We do have, so I talked about a lot of our alumni work in the industry, and they have jobs, but we also have several students who have used the master's and gone on to a different degree. So we have currently one student who's in med school getting her MD degree. We have one in nursing school who wants to become a nurse practitioner, a genetic specialist. And then we do have someone from our last graduating class who is now getting a PhD in bioinformatics at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. So it's a great program. So it's kind of all over. I would say the one great thing about getting a master's and not going straight for a PhD is that you can then get in the industry or work in a research lab for a couple of years, get a little bit more experience, and really decide what is it you want to do. Because I have a PhD. And so I have a PhD in something very specific. I worked for 7 years of my life on one protein, right? And so if I kind of picked it kind of randomly, I really enjoyed what I did. But when I was going into that, I really did not have a good handle on all the different options and what specialty I really wanted to have. You sometimes get a little pigeonholed to who has room in their lab that can train you. And so I really think as a PhD, I do think there are tons of great jobs that you can only get with a PhD, but it's really best to go in with a little bit more information on exactly what you want to do. And I think with the MSGDA Masters, you have a lot of skills, a lot more hands-on skills to start with than people coming straight out of their undergraduate. And it really helps you hit the ground running. So that's a great question. Yeah. So we also have a PhD program at KGI. So you do have the opportunity to apply in the KGI PhD program in applied life sciences and continue for another 3 years after your degree.
Okay, I have one more question in the chat for you, Dr. Fortini. Let's see. Are there any potential opportunities for teaching assistant roles?
There are. So in our first year courses, I love to have a TA helping me, and the best TAs are people who have been through the class and can commiserate and know exactly when the stressful times are and how to study for that exam. I will say I have never taken any of the exams I have written. So we do have our second year students who serve as TAs for our first year classes. So that's definitely an option. We also have lots of other on-campus work study or even non-work study role. So we have tons of people who work for our admissions team. So if you come to interview, you will meet some of them, I'm sure. We have other students who work in labs just to help with the researchers. We have students who work at Oasis. So we have campus housing now. So they have resident assistants that live there. So there's lots of opportunities to work not full-time, but in a job that's very compatible with being a student. Okay, so I have a question in the direct messages for undergraduate in biochemistry, loves genetics, awesome. I'll just as an aside, I was always told that there's only two real fields in biology, biochemistry and genetics, and the rest is just a derivative. So if you love biochemistry and genetics, you're in the right spot. What areas of careers do you think I can make a big impact? So I think anyone with these skills can make a huge impact in all of what's going on. So medicine is changing really quickly these days and much more quickly than it used to. So I'll just give you this example. The Rady Children's Study looked at what would happen if they did whole genome sequencing within the first week of life for their babies who were sick in the intensive care unit and they didn't know why. So it's a small group of children. I mean, there's lots of children that are born and they're sick and we know why they're sick. But these are children who are born, we can't figure out why they're sick within the first couple days they're alive. So these are like 3 and 4 or 5 day old babies. So they're like, what happens if we do whole genome sequencing and get the results back in 2 days? And so they built a team to do this. And at first they just did 42 babies in the first study. And 16 of them, they could do something different that helped improve the lives of those children. And so that study only came out, I think like 5 years ago. And today it is the recommended course of action for any undiagnosed baby, right? Because they went through the first study with 40 babies and then they did what's called Project Baby Bear. So one of our politicians in California heard about it and wanted to do it for every sick baby in California. Weren't able to scale up that quickly, but then they did for 150 children. And again, 45% of the time they can make a diagnosis. And that's huge for these babies that are sick. And so just a few months ago, the recommendation came down from the American Medical Association and the pediatrics that if you have a sick baby and you don't know why, that the recommended thing is to sequence the children. And so that's going to take a huge scale up, right? If we have to start doing this at every children's hospital, not just like the 5 biggest children's hospitals in the United States, but every children's hospital, think about how many trained scientists that's going to be. Because they do this sort of pit crew style, like one person orders the test, puts it on the machine, it runs overnight, they come in early, they interpret the data, and they hand it to the doctor the next day. It's a 24-hour cycle. That's going to take a lot of people that have these skills. And the same thing too, if you really are into biochemistry and you like using that data, if you have these skills, you can also make targeted drug therapies, right? If we know exactly what change in the protein is causing the problem, maybe we can engineer a small molecule just for that patient. Even we have started these treatments that are for N of 1, that are for one person. We know the defect in their genome. We have a molecule that can counteract it, and we're going to give that to just one person. And then the next person who has a different mutation is going to get a different drug. And so there are ways now that we can use computer modeling to predict these things, but it always goes back to the genetics and understanding the genetics. So I think there's a million things you can do. I can't answer that. All right, other questions? Let me stop my share so I can see people's faces if they want. All right.